All right, we have Chris Nelson with LiveState, LiveView Reimagined. Chris is a co-founder and principal engineer at Launch Scout, a custom software development firm in Cincinnati. He created the company's apprenticeship program, mentors new developers, and helps set technology direction. He loves sharing what he's learned over 25 years of developing software across a wide range of industries. Chris has given workshops across the country and spoken at more conferences than you can shake a stick at. All the ones you know and love and have probably been to. Just to hold those in your mind. Those are the ones. Warm round of applause for Chris, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for that introduction. Welcome to LiveState and Friends. I retitled the talk since I talked to Bruce, so figured this was a little bit more descriptive. Kind of already got an introduction. I'm Chris Nelson. I've been doing Elixir pretty long time and building web apps for a really long time. And I am the creator of LiveState and kind of its ecosystem of libraries. Also a big fan of software development apprenticeship. I'm not talking about that, but if you want to talk about that, come find me afterwards. I am more than happy to share our experience with that, and it's all really good. All right, so what am I going to be talking about today? I'm going to be talking about three things and kind of going mostly into demos quite a bit. Since I've got three different kind of libraries to get through, I'll be going pretty quickly, but I'm going to try to leave time for questions at the end. So if stuff doesn't make sense, even after the demo and explanation, definitely please ask questions at the end. So fundamentally, LiveState, which is kind of the underpinning from these three things, really started with a question. And that question was, how could I or could I use LiveView in an app where Elixir is not serving it or even hosting the content? And of course, the next question might be like, why the heck would I even want that? And there are a few cases. The main one that I was coming across was the case of embedded apps. And what do I mean when I say an embedded app? An embedded app is an app that is designed to live not in your website, but potentially your customer's website. And I'll show some examples, but you might think of a comments widget or a shopping cart widget or even a hosted form, something like that. The other thing that we were seeing is we'd really like to embed apps in like for instance, our own website is generated by a static site generator, just because that's like an easy thing for our designers to use. And if we wanted to like deploy an app to that, like how do we do that? We'd have to like move the whole back end to Elixir. So those kind of problems. The other thing that we can kind of do with the approaches I'll be talking about is if you have an existing JavaScript front end that you need, or library or framework that you need to integrate with, I think this approach makes that a little more viable. And at the end of the day, all this for me is about being able to use Elixir in more places. All right, so to really think about the question of like, how would I use LiveView in more places, I distilled the question a little bit to thinking more about like, what do I really love about LiveView? And for me, it might not be the thing that you immediately think of. For me, the thing I really love about LiveView was not so much that it let me use Elixir front to back. For me, the most important thing about LiveView is actually not the templating language at all. If we think about like the code that we put in our templates, you know, I use LiveView a lot at work. I love it. And our designers are really, really smart. And they have learned how to write Elixir code, and they know how to do that. But when they start writing any significant code right in the Heeks template, the first thing I do is refactor that out into a function or a component. I really don't want much of any code in my template. So that kind of made me think more about like, okay, maybe it's not the language of the front end. It's really the model, and the thing that I really love about Elixir is how simple it makes my front end. And the way that LiveView makes our front end development process simple is our front end code only needs to do two things. It renders state and it sends events. That's pretty much it. And so LiveState is really about how could we use this pattern in more places, and can we keep our state in Elixir and our front end just like super, super simple. And so what I came up with is LiveState is a hex package containing mostly a channel behavior. It's really a thin veneer over Phoenix channels in a lot of ways. It also has a client-side NPM package for JavaScript. And like I said, it's mostly a wraparound Phoenix channels. And what it does is it sends events and receives state updates. That's pretty much what it's doing at the end of the day. To use LiveState on the Elixir side, you bring in the LiveState package and you use the LiveState channel behavior. And then kind of analogous to LiveView, you have a couple of callbacks to implement. You have an init callback, which produces the initial state. And then you have handle event callbacks, which look astonishingly like LiveView by design. And let's actually, oh, sorry, one more slide. So the JavaScript library, just to mention that briefly, it is called phx-live-state. That is unfortunately because live-state was already taken. In retrospect, I might have named it with a prefix, but oh well. And the way it's kind of designed to work is it's like increasing levels of abstraction. So kind of at the lower level API, you have a LiveState object that you can use to connect. Slightly above that, you have a connect element function that you can use to wire up a custom HTML element if you're using one. And then kind of at the highest level of abstraction, at least for dealing with custom HTML elements, there is a LiveState decorator that lets you like declaratively annotate a custom element to hook it up to LiveState. All right, let's jump into demo time. So for this demo, it's contrived, of course, but what it is it's an airport map custom element, and it can be dropped into any HTML page that you want. And what it does is it just displays pins on the map for airport data. And when you pan and zoom the match, it's fetching a new data set from the back end. And it's just like a preloaded data set from the FAA of all the airports in the US. And here's what it looks like. So this is the airport map. And when I pan or zoom, it's just fetching a new set of data. I can click in on a pin and it'll do something wonky, but what it should do is, oh man, it's being a jerk. It should be displaying some airport information. So that's I'm sure my JavaScript screwing up there in some way. But let's actually walk through what the code is doing. So in the HTML itself, let's see, let me get back into, is that a little more legible? Okay, cool. So that's what the HTML looks like. We have a script tag that brings in our custom element JavaScript, and then sure enough, we have this airport map element that we give it a URL to connect to our Phoenix app backend, and an API key that the JavaScript needs to like do the Google Maps thing. That custom element itself, this is what it looks like. And I realize, there's definitely a fair amount of code here going on, but the relevant bits of it are hopefully not too much. At the top, we have our LiveState decorator, and that's what declaratively says this custom element connects to a backend. The URL comes in through an attribute. The topic is for the Phoenix channel. And then that events argument is, importantly, it's basically saying somewhere in this element, you might see these custom events. And that is like internally the elements I'm using, that's what those things dispatch. They dispatch a tiles loaded event and a bounds changed event when the map initially loads and when anybody pans or zooms. So what I'm doing in LiveState is saying, hey, when you see those events, turn them into messages up to the channel so that I can get them on the back end. And that back end, I'll show you in a second, is just going to compute new state in the form of a set of airport data. And that airport's property there, that's what holds the airport data. And then inside the HTML, I have a map, and then I'm just looping over the airports and rendering the markers. So that's what's going on. So my front-end code is just rendering the state of the airports and dispatching the events. And that's it, even though there's like some decorators and stuff to look at. At the end of the day, it's as simple as I could get it. So let's look at the channel backend. There's actually less code here. We have our init callback that loads an initial state that's just the API key. And then we have our 2 handle event callbacks that do exactly the same thing. And they essentially just, whichever event it is, the payload's the same by design. And the payload is the geolocations of the 4 corners of the current rectangle of the map. And I just hand that off to an Elixir function that knows how to search the database based on geoloc. And then I just return a new state that's the airports. So that's kind of the whole thing. All right, so that was LiveState. And I've been using it a bit. We have some people using it in production. It's worked out fine. But it kind of got me thinking. And the things I started thinking after I kind of had initial versions of LiveState out were like, how could I make my development front end even simpler? Could I find a way to use LiveState without even having to create that custom element at all? And could I just like start working directly in an HTML file? I was kind of like looking at things like HTMX and kind of getting inspired by that. So that led me to create another thing called Live Templates. And Live Templates is essentially a live template custom element that itself has attributes that it uses to connect to a LiveState channel like we already saw. The difference is its inner content is a client-side template that's going to be evaluated once that connection is made. I'm using a client-side templating library called Spray. It's, I don't know that it's like super popular. I wouldn't expect anybody to have heard of it, but the client-side templating space I kind of like have been looking at for a long time, and Spray is pretty good compared to what else is out there. And then once that template is hooked up, it knows how to send events declaratively, and it knows how to send form events, clicks, and we'll be adding more as like we actually get this thing fleshed out. Of course, it knows how to re-render on state change. Optionally, it can actually share context with other things on the page, although I'm not going to have time to demo that. Okay, so let's look at an example. Hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. So from my live template example, I built the world's stupidest CRM, and it's basically just a list of people. And for the back end, I just ran the Phoenix context generator to create a people schema that has a first name, a last name, and a birth date. So it's pretty boilerplate. And let's see what that looks like. All right, is that okay size-wise? Okay, cool. So yeah, this is cruddy CRM. Sorry for the lack of style. My HTML is like school on a Saturday. Anybody? No class, that's right. Thank you. I'll be here all week. All right. So we can create people. We can edit them. If we add and we don't fill things out, we get some error messages. So it's like the very beginning of a CRUD app. We can create, we can edit. I didn't bother with delete, but delete is simpler than the other stuff. But let's see what the code for that actually looks like. And to do that, oh yeah, I'm going to go into my editor for this part. So this is, and I'll make that a little bit bigger. How is the font size here? Bigger? A little bit? All right, cool. So I'm not going to go through this stuff at the top too much, but I am using something called import maps, which are really cool, and I don't have time to dive into details, but essentially, without using any kind of front-end build tool at all, this is just an HTML file, it is able to like do an import of my library and all its dependencies. So go check out import maps on your own, they're really cool. But this is the live template element itself. And it has a URL and a topic, and that's what establishes the connection to the channel backend. And then inside of it is the template itself. And we have static stuff at the top, and finally when we get to the bottom of the table, we start seeing spray. And this is what spray looks like. It's just got like magic attributes that start with a colon. And I think it's fairly self-explanatory. I'm just like looping over the people that have been put on the state for me. And I'm using expressions to display bits of the current person. And then here's the first place where we see an event about to be sent up. So that edit button, this is where I'm using a send click directive. And this is the thing that I'm providing to Spray to tell it, hey, here's how to send up an event to my backend. And it's going to send an event named edit person, and it's going to send along any data attributes in the payload. That's kind of how it works. And then that dialog, I'm just opening whenever you're editing. That's another property of state. And then finally, that send submit is going to bundle up everything into the form as a payload and send it up to the back end. So that's the front end. And then the channel itself is really fairly boilerplate Elixir, I think, for the most part. It's going to look hopefully fairly similar to LiveView. Again, that's by design. In the initial state setup, I'm loading all the people by calling my context function, so standard Phoenix stuff. In my to add person and edit person, I'm basically doing almost the same thing. I'm either making a new person or looking one up by ID. I'm setting that editing flag to true, which causes that modal to appear. And then I'm just saying I don't have any errors yet. In the save person, I'm just going to do more or less what you would expect. If I have a current person, I'm going to look it up and call update. And then I'm just like doing the dumb thing and setting people to just like reload all the people from the database after you create. And then I set editing false to close the modal. So hopefully not too much going on there. Hopefully that makes sense so far. How am I on time, by the way? I'm not seeing anybody telling me I'm almost out, so I'm going to keep going. All right.
12 minutes.
12 minutes. Oh, okay. Plenty of time. Okay. Any questions so far on any of this? All right. Well, we'll have time for questions at the end. Because I basically only have one more topic to cover, and that is a thing called live signals. So just curious, how many people have heard of signals yet? So just a few people. Signals is a thing that has come out recently in the JavaScript community. And the reason that I became interested in it is it's kind of emerging as a standard way to do reactivity across pretty much all of the JavaScript ecosystem, which is really interesting to me. You know, they're all kind of converging on the same thing, at least at the pattern level, and I think pretty soon at the implementation level. And it's a really simple idea. A signal is basically a value that can track access and kind of like subscribe and re-render changes to anybody who accesses that value. It's been, I think it came out first in Solid.js, I don't know, or Preact, I'm not sure, one of those two. But it's since been adopted by Angular. The other thing that's happened recently is it's started to go through the TC39 process, which means like signals might make it soon into the language of JavaScript itself and be adopted by all the browsers. And that's interesting because now on the front end we have like a standard for reactivity that we can just like assume is always going to be there. So, of course, predictably, I wanted to come up with a thing to incorporate that, and that is called live signals. And basically live signals is bridging the signal concept to the back-end channel that you've kind of already seen. In my initial implementation, which is like less than 40 lines of code, I am able to support both Preact and the TC39, which is like the standards kind of like example implementation. But supporting another library of like, the thing with signals right now, they're so new that the implementations have the same idea but slightly different syntax. And if you wanted to support like a different signal implementation, my guess is it would be like 10 lines of code or something like that. But let's actually see what this looks like. And we are going to see a Preact demo. And I know almost no Preact, but I was able to get this to work. Oops. Oh, man. Sorry. It's hard to hold a mic and click at the same time. All right. So this is really the same demo we saw before by design, but just to show you that it does actually work, I'll key in some stuff and hit add and show that, yeah, it actually does add the thing. And on the front end, let's actually see some Preact code. Sorry, I know I make your eyes bleed a little bit, showing so much JavaScript in the Elixir conference. Sorry, not sorry. But here's the important bits. This is where I'm actually using the live signals library. I'm calling a create Preact signal function, and I'm giving it my connection details to tell it how to connect to the back end. And this is exactly what we've seen before. It's mainly the URL and the topic that define the channel that I'm connecting to get my list of people. So create Preact signal returns both the signal and a dispatch event function, which the code can use to push an event back up. In the case of Preact, you kind of got to do that yourself, at least for now, coming up with the event payload. But using that signal, let's go down here. This is where I'm actually using that signal. When I call value, that value is going to be the list of people, and I can just iterate over that. And because Preact already knows how to deal with a signal, it just automatically will re-render anytime a change is pushed down from the back end over the channel. I didn't have to do anything to make that happen. On the pushing side, I am building an event more manually than I am with live templates, but I'm just like grabbing all the data from the form, making a new custom event called save person, where the detail property is the new person with the values from the form. So a little more code, but hopefully not like horrible. So yeah, that's live signals. All right, so a couple of things that are actually built with LiveState in the wild that I thought at least worth mentioning. There's something called LiveRoom, which is a startup in Spain that is using it to build their product, which is like a live demo website, so that like you can drop a custom element on your website and kind of like share a demo in real time with your customers. That's pretty cool. And then we've been building a thing called Launch Elements internally. And I'll just load that website. And that is a set of hosted custom elements to let you drop functionality into a website. It does things like e-commerce and comment sections and a few other things. All right. So I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, it looks like I'm on time-ish. I may or may not have time for questions, but all right, cool.